Jay Czarkowski is how to say that. And he gives us his background along with wife Diane. She is very much on this journey with him. They were in construction, then they were cultivators and dispensary owners, then they held fundraisers at their home for the Amendment 64 campaign, and they were the ones in the centerfold of High Times with the Amendment 64 sign, if you remember that. Tells us much more. So,
okay.
Jay Czarkowski.
You said that just like a true Polak.
And there you go. Well, my girlfriend's Polish.
So you better have that right.
I better know, and I'm sure that she will tell us both that we are not pronouncing it correctly.
We're not. I think if we were in Poland, it would be Czarkowski.
That's probably.
Czarkowski.
She'll be happy to hear you say that.
Yep, Czarkowski.
But you were not born in Poland.
I was not.
Okay. Born here?
Born here in Connecticut.
Aha. Oh, so you're a Northeast guy.
I'm a Northeast guy.
Okay. 860-203, where were you?
Yeah, originally 203.
Okay.
In the Hartford area.
Uh-huh.
And I can't tell you, I don't know if this is appropriate content for a podcast, but the first three numbers of my phone number growing up were 666.
Oh, wow. Ooh. What effect did that have on you, do you think?
None. At least none that I knew of at the time.
Right. Wow, so 203-666 whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
I don't want to repeat the rest because my parents still have that number, and
Oh, we can't do that.
you don't know who's out there listening.
Lurking about. Were they born in the U.S. or were they born?
They were also born in the U.S.
Uh-huh.
Skola on my mom's side and Czarkowski on my dad's side.
Okay, so it's Polish through and through.
But all of their parents came over. Well, no, Skola's Italian.
Oh, excuse me. Okay.
So grandparents on the Skola side came over from Lacedonia, which I understand is outside of Rome.
Uh-huh.
The Polish grandparents, not so sure what part of Poland they were from.
Got it. Okay, but that was then, and they came over about turn of the century, right around then, right?
Turn of the century, and who knows, maybe it wasn't even Poland back then.
I think it was, but we'll check.
Sure. We're not here to talk about geography, right?
No, I don't think so.
Good.
Well, but we do have to get through Connecticut, right? I mean, you grew up there. You said Hartford, and then where?
Grew up in a little town called Newington.
Uh-huh. Okay, fair enough. I don't know where that is. It's near Hartford.
Yeah, it's just south of West Hartford.
Okay. But, I mean, the reason that we're talking about where you grew up is because these conversations are about who you are, because that informs what you do. And, we shouldn't go any further without saying that you run with your wife, Canna Advisors, right?
We do.
And you were a founding member of the NCIA.
We are.
And you worked on the Amendment 64, at least supported the campaign.
Yeah, we held fundraisers at our home, dedicated our time, and of course had a great time at the watch party when the announcements were made.
Got it. Okay.
In fact, what was funny is a photograph of the crowd that was cheering once the announcement was made that Amendment 64 passed. My wife and I were both in the picture that made it into the centerfold of High Times magazine.
Uh-huh.
And it's interesting trying to explain to your children, how mommy and daddy were in High Times.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Do we want to go further there, or maybe take a left?
That's kind of the end of the story.
Yeah, exactly. We were in High Times, and that's about that. All right, so you do really run the company with Di. Did she also run the dispensary with you?
She did. In the early days of the industry, she spearheaded the dispensary, and I was more on the cultivation side.
Okay. All right. So let's go again back to Connecticut and try to get up to the dispensary days and find out what happened there, and then how we got to that party for Amendment 64. So you grew up in this town that few people have heard of, I guess, near Hartford. And did you spend your formative years in Connecticut, or were you moving around?
No, grew up. My parents still live in the same town, Newington.
Uh-huh.
Went to high school there. Grew up in college in Vermont.
Uh-huh. And UVM or
Norwich University.
Oh, okay. And what did you study?
That crazy military school up there.
Okay, yeah. So we wanted to get into. You've got a little bit of a military background, no?
Just a little bit, just from the Norwich days.
Okay. All right.
And then my degree was in electrical engineering.
Okay. And why? I mean, that's just how your brain works, I guess.
I'm not quite sure. All I remember is I was looking at the curriculum, and there was a class on communications. I was like, oh, we're going to build radios.
Right.
But it was really all math.
Aha. So they tricked you.
Yeah, the old bait and switch. But no, a degree in electrical engineering came in handy in the early days of running cultivation facilities in Colorado when nobody really had quite enough power to do everything they wanted to do. So we did a lot of fancy footwork with moving wires around and trying to balance panels to keep all the lights going.
So you did use your degree. How did you get from Vermont to Colorado? Is that a straight line or?
Yeah, it sure was. I thought I would never leave Connecticut. I was very happy there. I have a lot of family in Connecticut. Then I had a good friend, and everybody has a friend like this. That's that friend that seems to be working at some ski resort in the wintertime, and then maybe she's at some beach resort in the summer. It was a friend that we all visit when we're young. You know, you take a road trip once or twice a year to see this friend because she's always working and living somewhere cool.
Yeah.
Well, that friend then went to move to Boulder, Colorado. So, of course, the same group came out to visit our friend in Boulder, and some of us, many of us, never left.
Aha. So this is a friend that can certainly convince, but Boulder doesn't need anybody to do its bidding for it. That's a beautiful, part of anywhere on Earth, right? You know,
It's a wonderful town.
we don't have to qualify it with a beautiful part of Colorado. That's just beautiful. So what called you? What made you stay?
Well, I think it was the great outdoors.
Uh-huh.
The great outdoors, and there were a lot of cool people.
Right. Okay. And you had graduated, though, so you weren't going to school in Boulder like
Nope.
some of our guests have, gone through those halls.
No, I had that degree in hand, and I was free and clear.
Right. And so, but what year is this? This is not recent.
This was arriving in Boulder, Colorado, with the Chevy S10 pickup hauling the U-Haul trailer on New Year's Eve, 1991.
91. Okay. So it's early 90s. You've got the U-Haul. What job are you looking for because you're not getting into the dispensary in 91, right?
Well, I'm joking. No, of course not. Of course not. No dispensaries back then. I wanted to get into high-tech sales.
Okay. All right. And did that.
Did that.
Okay.
And then eventually worked for a big company in your neck of the woods, Computer Associates.
Oh, sure. So they were based on Long Island, right?
Yep.
All right. That's where I'm from. And Jay knows that. And so you were doing that, but based in Denver.
Based in Denver.
Okay. And how many years? A while, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think it was. We had a run in high tech sales of about 8 to 10 years.
Okay. All right. And what did you take from that? What lessons did you learn from high tech sales for 10 years?
Exactly that one operative word: sales.
So you know how to do it.
How do you close a deal?
Right.
Who are the right people to work with? I think so many people that are trying to sell, and I actually witnessed this yesterday at our booth. There was a gentleman who was a sales rep for a company that manufactures a product for cannabis cultivators.
Okay.
That was just earnestly pitching his technology to somebody in my booth.
Okay.
That person happened to be my executive assistant and office manager, who really did not care about that technology.
Interesting.
So I think a lot of times in sales, you really need to make sure that you're talking to the right person.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Really the executive assistant.
Yeah.
Okay. But earnest. And what can you do from there, right?
He believed in his product, I could tell you that.
Right, which is great. The only issue there, of course, is is it the executive assistant a man or a woman?
A woman.
And so she's not on the market for his product is the
Not
issue.
for that product he was selling, no.
Right. Well, it could have also been a social thing. You know what I mean? Maybe he was making an approach and didn't know another way to,
No, he was really focused on his product.
He was
I could
selling.
tell. He was selling.
All right. So you learned not only how to sell, but who to sell to, which is how to sell, right?
Absolutely.
What else? What other lessons did you take from CA?
Well, just the camaraderie that a company like CA could build.
And what relation do you have relationships from that company still?
Well, there
To this
was
day?
there was a young woman that I used to work with at CA.
Uh-huh.
Her name was Diane Jackson
Aha.
at the time,
I see where we're going.
and now she's Diane Czarkowski.
Uh-huh.
So
And
I met
was
my
she
wife.
also based in Denver?
She was.
Okay. And where is she from?
She's from Kansas City, Kansas.
Okay, we'll get into that with her at a later date. But what was she doing in Denver for CA?
She was in sales also.
She was, okay. So was this friendly competition, or were you in different parts?
We were on different teams.
Okay, all right. So she was doing her job, you were doing your job. Tell us about that fateful day. Since she is, not only your wife, she's your business partner. She is a big part of this story. Right?
She is indeed.
Right.
There was no dating while we were employees or
Okay.
while we worked together.
And that's on the books or off the books, or there just wasn't?
There just wasn't.
Okay.
Good friends. The years went by. We had our first date
Okay.
one day, and we've been business partners since we were engaged.
Okay.
So even though we've only been married for 12 years, we've been in business together for 13.
Aha. Well, so that one would assume that it would go the other way around.
One would assume, correct.
How did it turn out the way that it did?
Well, I had my house in Boulder, Colorado. At the time, we were convinced that the whole high-tech bubble, this is in 2002 now, into 2002, when that bubble began to burst, we had enough money set aside that we wanted to pursue a passion, which was developing real estate and construction. So I sold my house in Boulder, moved in with her. I had quit my job 6 months before. She quit hers, went from a significant mid-six-figure income down to a zero income.
Aha.
So we had a rally, develop some real estate, build some houses, and make some money.
But you chose to go mid six figures to zero.
We chose that consciously, yes.
Okay. Both of you were on the same page. Did one push the other, or was that a combined
No.
decision?
We're like, let's do this.
All right. And whose concept was it? You said it was a dream for both of you, or for?
Yeah, dream's probably a strong word, but
Okay.
we're adventurous souls, so we bought some property and hired an architect, and we built our first duplex.
Okay. So yeah, tell us about the duplex. Tell us about what you're talking about here.
Sure, we bought a piece of property. It was a large property in Denver. It was a total of 5 lots with one little 600 square foot house on it. Rented a backhoe, knocked that thing down. My neighbor came over with his skid steer and loaded it up in a couple of dumpsters for us, and we built a duplex.
And we were off and running.
We're off and running.
And did you live in that, or no? You rented out both, or sold both, or what?
Yeah, it was actually, we built a duplex, and we built a second one right next door. So this piece of property was big enough for 2 duplexes.
Right.
And we built them and sold them.
Got it.
And of course, at the time, I had no idea this was going on, but there was a lot of aggressive lending going on at the time. So all we knew is that we were building these duplexes, and families would come in with their realtors and with their mortgage brokers, and they would put these things under contract before we even had them done.
Wow.
We, of course, thought that we were some kind of geniuses for figuring all of this out. The reality was, again, there was a lot of this aggressive lending going on, and
Right.
pretty much anybody with a pulse was getting put into a mortgage at the time.
As we have since learned.
We have since learned, of course, the Great Depression in 2008.
Indeed. All right. So 2002, 2003, one duplex goes up, sold. Next duplex goes up, sold. Did you stay in that kind of residential market?
We did. We began to just build more duplexes in single-family homes in the Denver area. Went up to Steamboat Springs, a beautiful ski resort in the mountains of Colorado. We built ourselves a second home, and then while we were up there having a second home, he says, well, if we're going to be up here hanging out, might as well do some work.
Right.
So we began to build houses in Steamboat Springs.
Aha. Okay. So again, you seem to turn where you go into what you do. As I say, who you are informs what you do. It seems like for you go, you do something wherever you land.
Yeah, I don't. In retrospect, it's probably not a good thing. I don't know why in the world somebody would feel that they need to create a business in the town where they have their second home.
Right.
That makes no sense.
Well, it made perfect sense for you, though, right? I mean, you did okay with Steamboat Springs, I would imagine, or no?
We did fine, but you're up there working. You're supposed to be relaxing.
Where does cannabis come into this thing? What at what point?
Sure. Well, we all remember the Great Depression. Seems like a long time ago now, certainly. Back in 2008, 2009. We were scaling back our construction and development company. We had closed our office in Steamboat Springs, and we were in the process of closing our office downtown Boulder Boulder, Colorado, and falling back to we had a home office that was big enough for 4 people, somewhat of a skeleton crew, but we thought we'd fall back to the home office and keep operations going. So we put our little building in downtown Boulder up for lease. Well, Seth, who do you think began to approach us back in 2009 wanting to lease our building? Groups of young kids.
Right.
And some of them had 3 months rent they were going to give us in advance, and the next group had 6 months rent they were going to pay us in advance. And these young people, they wanted to open what they called at the time a medical marijuana dispensary. And I had never heard of such a crazy thing. I'm like, you want to do what? And sure enough, they wanted to sell marijuana. So, one of these young men gave me their business plan to review and assured me that this was an up-and-coming thing. So I called my attorney, and he said the same thing, and he suggested that I go pick up a copy of the weekly paper at my favorite coffee shop, the Boulder Weekly, and look on the back page and look at some of these ads that were out now. And sure enough, there were advertisements for businesses, and they were selling marijuana. Of course, you had to have what was called at the time a medical marijuana card.
Sure, you had to have a red card.
You had to have a red card.
That's right.
So being a curious guy, I quickly went out to see the doctor to get my red card. And he looked at me and said, well, you look healthy. What's wrong with you? I said, well, Doc, I got a bad foot. I don't want to minimize the medical efficacy of marijuana. Certainly, at the time, I had no idea that marijuana could be medically beneficial to anybody.
Right.
Of course, in the last 5.5 years, I've seen with my own eyes, not only can marijuana successfully treat many diseases, but we've seen it save people's lives.
Indeed.
So we're big medical believers. But again, talking to the attorney, he suggested that it was, at the time, of course, very risky. There was no licensing process. There was no regulation. But we decided to go for it. Instead of leasing out that building, we kept that building, and we opened a dispensary. And then we went out to find some property to build a cultivation facility. At the time, it only took a $25 check to the City of Boulder Sales and Use Tax desk for a sales and use tax permit with a one-page application, which was, of course, approved on the spot.
Right.
And our dispensary was open for business.
So that's $25.
$25.
And what year is this?
2009.
Okay. So 2009, you've got your $25 fee. You've got your one-page application approved on the spot. You've got your dispensary open, and you've got your dispensary. Now you've got your cultivation, and you're ready to go.
Yeah. Well, it was an additional $25, of course, for the sales and use tax permit for the cultivation facility.
Right. Of course. Yes. So that's $50 in total.
$50. Big investment, but we got through it.
And when you mentioned high times earlier, you didn't so much. You don't strike me as so much of a cannabis enthusiast yourself. I don't know if Diane is or not. You seem to be coming at it not necessarily from the user's perspective. Is that fair?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Certainly when we got into the business, my initial reason for getting into the cannabis industry was to profit. My wife Diane, I would say she was really super interested in actually helping people.
Good.
To the point where our first dispensary, whether it was allowed or not, if somebody was really sick and they needed medicine, we would do whatever it took to get that person medicine, including late night deliveries to hospitals, deliveries to homebound patients. In many cases, we would provide this medicine at no charge. But in addition to building a profitable business, Di made sure that we helped a lot of people along the way.
Absolutely. As far as running the cultivation and running the dispensary, you were running a successful business. Where were you finding success?
Well, I believe the key to our success back then was in our cultivation facility. And I could tell you this, you had asked about my previous use of cannabis. I've always enjoyed the plant.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Ever since I was a young man.
All right.
Now, I didn't understand that there were different strains like Super Lemon Haze and OG Kush. I just thought there was good pot and bad pot.
Right.
I knew some of it was brown, some of it was green. I had one friend who always seemed to have the good stuff, and I had one friend that always seemed to have the bad stuff.
Right.
And that was the extent of my knowledge. So, clearly, making the decision to get into the industry, we knew that we had to find some people with certain skill sets.
Right.
So our initial approach in finding such a person was, thinking about who we might know. Well, I said to myself, who's that guy that I hang out with every year at your company Christmas party?
Mm-hmm.
And we contacted this person to see if they might have some knowledge that could help us. And sure enough, this gentleman had his dealer.
Mm.
And for the purposes of this podcast, let's call this dealer Sean.
Okay.
So I said, can you introduce me to Sean?
Uh-huh.
So this gentleman, who was a realtor, set up the meeting with Sean.
Uh-huh.
It was a big day for us. So Sean shows up at our office building. We bring Sean back to the conference room, and he sits down in the chair. He's got the hoodie up. He's got the hoodie, and he kind of slumps down in the chair, and we're talking to him about our project. I think we offered him 15% of the company to be our grower.
Uh-huh.
He lasted for about 2 weeks and quit.
Okay.
And we took back the 15%.
Sure you did.
And that was our first gross, hiring. That was our first master grower story. Everybody has a master grower story from the early days.
That's one.
And then we hired 2 more master growers. They lasted a little bit longer.
Okay.
But after a few months, Seth, we decided that we would hire this young man with no experience growing cannabis, but he had a degree in horticulture from the University of Nebraska.
Right.
And he came from a hard-working agricultural family in Nebraska that was very successful.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy jumped in with us, and within 3 or 4 months, we were growing large amounts of good cannabis.
Right.
And we always had a big supply of our own cultivated cannabis that we sold through our store.
Mm-hmm.
At the time in Colorado, the laws were you had to grow at least 70% of what you sold. And if you had extra, you could sell up to 30% of what you cultivated.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly, you did not want to be the guy having to, buy from people.
Right.
You wanted to be the company that grew 100% of what went through your dispensary, and then have the additional 30% to sell wholesale.
Right.
So we were always in that category.
Threshold.
Yeah.
Right. 130% essentially.
130%.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. And then what other dispensaries were clients at the time?
Well, gosh, let's see. We sold some wholesale back into the farm.
Okay.
In Boulder. We used to sell some wholesale down to a number of dispensaries down in Denver. Some of those don't exist anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Some of the wholesale stories from the early days could get quite interesting. There were no manifests in the early days. I remember a couple of times, not quite sure what the rules were down in Denver, carrying several pounds of dried cannabis flower in a DeWalt tool bag as I walked into the dispensary,
Mm-hmm.
just to try to be discreet.
Right.
Of course, now those issues have been sorted out.
Indeed.
We have transportation manifests and secure transportation boxes and everything else.
Right. Okay, good. So you are running a successful business, selling 100% of your through your doors, and then an extra 30% outside of your doors. And I think this is was that the first point where you realized that there were clients to be had besides the patients themselves in the cannabis industry?
Clients, as in consulting clients?
Indeed.
No, not at that time.
Okay, but clients nonetheless, in terms of you had product and they had a need.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And 2009, 2010, 2011, what's the next change?
Well, in 2012, we again we're fairly involved with the Amendment 64 campaign to legalize marijuana like alcohol in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
We donated our house to the Marijuana Policy Project to hold fundraisers. Donated our time. Spent money on signs, just did what we could to help out.
Mm-hmm.
After the election, when we passed medical cannabis, of course, at the same election, Massachusetts passed medical marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
So I traveled out to Boston with a group of folks from Denver that were putting on a legal seminar out in Boston, really with not much of an agenda. I have a lot of family in Boston and Connecticut, so that go out there and see what was going on. And we were approached by a group of 5 guys from Connecticut
Mm-hmm.
that asked if we could possibly help them win one of these competitive licenses in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, at the time, there was really no such thing as a consulting company in the cannabis space. Denver Relief a good group of guys down in Denver. They started Denver Relief Consulting right about the time of the 2012 election.
Right. And we've spoken with Ian, so yeah.
Yep, good guys there. Other than them, I think they were it at the time.
Yeah.
So of course I told these gentlemen I believe I could help them, although we had no idea what that meant, because Connecticut was really the first truly competitive state to have a competitive application process. But we all worked together for a year, and eventually we won. We won one of those 4 cultivation licenses in Connecticut. It was a very exciting time.
Yeah. So, and what is the nature of that, that license as we speak?
Sure, it's a fully operational grow facility in West Haven, Connecticut, called Advanced Grow Labs.
And what's the latest as far as Connecticut regulations from your point of view?
Well, the patient restrictions are still somewhat limited, although they do allow for PTSD. But one of the issues with Connecticut, which is an issue in a lot of states, is if there's not a certain number of licenses, I don't feel that an industry could ever really develop. The industry really can't hit critical mass. So even a year plus into this right now, Connecticut, with this population of, I think it's 3 or 4 million people, only has 3,000 registered patients.
Right.
So it's tough for the Connecticut operations right now.
Got it. And we might come back to that, but I want to get back to Colorado because you gave your home to the movement, as it were, for Amendment 64 to pass. I want to kind of go back to those days, and you mentioned a couple of names, but take us through that time period and what you did for the campaign. You lent them your house and all of that, but when did it start to really occur to you that you needed to be such a big part of this?
Well, I think at the end of the day, a lot of it was, and we get back to this line a lot, it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It's the right thing to do. And, being in the Colorado industry early, we had relationships with a lot of these guys that were involved in the campaign. Betty Aldworth, Mason DeVert, Brian Vicente, and I know I'm missing other important folks that were part of that. This was the next project that they were working on, and our philosophy was, how can we help?
Right.
But by no means were we a large part of that campaign, but we did what we could.
Got it. And what else was happening at the time? How was the Boulder dispensary going? How was the cultivation going in Boulder?
At the time of the Amendment 64 campaign, we were no longer owners in Boulder Canna dispensary.
Oh, wait a second. What happened there?
Well, at the end of 2011, our cultivation facility was in a warehouse off of East Pearl Street in Boulder, Colorado, and it was time to renew our lease. The landlords, they would not renew our lease. Not because of any malice or feelings against medical marijuana, but they were 3 older gentlemen in their late 60s and early 70s, and they had put the property under contract with a developer.
Okay.
This was their retirement. So even though these guys would, they'd hang around the grow, and they were big fans of the plant, Seth.
Got it.
I'll tell you, they really enjoyed their marijuana. They were looking more forward to the $5 million they were going to get.
Right.
And I guess their philosophy was, we need to have Jay's operation around. When we have our $5 million, we could buy all the marijuana we please.
Indeed.
So of course we were disappointed, but we understood it was time to move the grow facility. So we applied to the state of Colorado to move our license. They of course forwarded us a 1-page form and said, please fill this out, and you're welcome to move your grow facility anywhere you please, provided it meets current regulations. Now, the city of Boulder, it was not so easy. The city of Boulder's response was, well, I'm sorry, fellas, you can't move your license. You have to surrender it, and then you're going to have to apply for new licenses somewhere else. So, didn't a little frustrated by that response, and come to find out, the city of Boulder inherited a city attorney from Seattle who was just very much anti-marijuana.
Right.
And his assistant city attorney, equally of hard stance anti-marijuana.
Right.
Now, if you look at the dynamic back then, city of Boulder, with a population of 100,000 people, 200, remember I told you the story earlier about the $25 sales and use tax permit. Well, I wasn't the only one writing these $25 checks.
Right.
A lot of other folks were writing $25 checks. And over the course of 6 or 7 months, 200 of these medical marijuana businesses developed in the city of Boulder.
Right.
And of course, even though this was all pre-license and pre-regulation, the city of Boulder had to honor these sales and use tax permits. So all of these existing operations were grandfathered in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to put that in perspective, that would be like, let's just say for a minute that New York City only had a population of 10 million people. If you did the comparative math, that would be like New York City having 20,000 medical marijuana businesses opening up pre-license, pre-regulation.
Right.
20,000. So of course some of our anti-marijuana officials in the city of Boulder, they were quite concerned about this proliferation of cannabis, and they began to look for ways to shut some of these businesses down. So the lack of a process for moving a grow operation, of course, was one tool of many to make it difficult for these marijuana businesses to last and stick around.
Or in your case, impossible? Or was there a third, or was that it?
Well, back to the days of Norwich University, we were taught back then that nothing was impossible.
Indeed.
For those that have the will. So of course, not being one to give up so easily, we went out and began to look for other space. Mm-hmm. And we actually found some other space. We found an existing grow operation that it seemed to be available. This existing grow had some adjacent available real estate. There was another vacant building next door. So we began to cobble together a couple of leases in an attempt to move our operation.
Okay.
Now, I'll tell you, if you've never moved a 10,000 square foot grow operation before, you should try it sometimes. It's quite an adventure, especially while keeping I'm not just talking about moving lights and benches. This is like while keeping everything in production.
Right.
We had one room that was probably 4 weeks into flower. We had to move this whole room while keeping the plants in flower, without stressing them out.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all kinds of fun.
Wow.
But the bigger issue was, so that the city of Boulder, okay, they would of course just prefer you to go away.
Sure.
But they couldn't tell you can't apply for a new license. But they make that application process quite difficult. Mm-hmm. And they could drag it on for many, 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 many months.
Right. And they did.
Yes, they did. They did indeed, Seth. And I had a business to keep in operation.
Right. Right.
So we had the ability to keep some plants going in a small footprint in this new facility while we were building out the larger footprint. Uh-huh. And we had a few issues with the city back then because a couple of our plants crossed the line.
And how do you mean?
Well, there was this imaginary line that the city of Boulder imposed in our grow operation. And all the plants had to be on one side of the imaginary line. And if the plants crossed the imaginary line, well, we were in violation.
Right. And that's where you found yourself.
We did. In addition to the plants being over the line one day, the city came out for a surprise inspection. And I'm embarrassed to say this on the public podcast, but there was a 6-pack of beer in the refrigerator.
Shame on you.
Yeah. And that's also a violation.
Right. So you've got yourself 2 violations.
We have 2.
And how do you get out of this?
Well, we actually had a 3rd violation.
Oh, excuse me.
I should probably mention.
Don't want to jump the gun.
Well, we had a business partner that was accused of being under the influence of cannabis because he had a dry mouth.
Oh.
So the city cited us for that. Certainly difficult to prove. And the city of Boulder, of course, was quite embarrassed afterwards when they learned that this young man who had a dry mouth had just completed 15 rounds of radiation on the cancer in his jaw. Uh-huh. So, yeah, at least we were able to wiggle out of that one.
Right. So cancer got you out of the 3rd violation.
Yeah.
Right. And again, cannabis as medicine, we have had many guests on already discussing that, and Nurse Heather comes to mind.
Nurse Heather, wonderful woman.
Indeed, indeed. So we will tackle that issue with other guests, is my point. Let's get back to these 2 other violations. How did you get out? How did you wiggle out of these?
Well, really at the time there was no way to wiggle out of them. The city of Boulder used these violations as a reason to not issue the licenses for these new facilities.
Imaginary line, 6-pack of beer. You no longer grow cannabis.
Correct.
Okay. And so you and Diane are both, adventurous folks. What happens now? We can't do this. What do we do?
Well, we were fortunate enough to still have the reputation of having one of the leading dispensaries in the state of Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
We were able to sell our ownership in that dispensary and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Diane spent the rest of that summer doing quite a bit of volunteer work for NCIA, the
Right.
National Cannabis Business Association, Industry Association.
Sure.
What's the matter?
Easy
with
for you to say.
And of course, we did some work with Amendment 64.
Yeah.
And I bought a dirt bike.
Okay. I just spend some time on that, I guess, right?
Spent some time on the dirt bike.
Well, then instead of we could go down the dirt bike rabbit hole, but let's talk about the NCIA instead. How about that?
It's a good idea.
Right. So founding members, you mentioned the MPP, and that's what NCIA grew out of, and, the Mason and Betty, and, those names have certainly come up before, and Brian, who will be on. But how did you guys get involved in NCIA and really become these founding members that we know you are?
Well, in the early days of the industry, when Aaron Smith, executive director, was going out, building this organization, he reached out to our organization, Boulder Kind Care, and my wife, Diane, business partner, she's always been a visionary when it came to meeting and establishing a business relationship with the right people. And I guess she saw something in Aaron Smith where she believed in him, and I believed his heart was in the right place. So we became one of the first NCIA members.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And what were those first days like? Because we've also had Aaron on, and he said it was maybe a little touch and go early on. So take us through the first few days, months,
Yeah, I think the term a lot of us like to use from those early days is, Trip Kieber has coined this term, I believe. 1 foot in the grave, the other foot on a slippery banana peel. And that about sums it up.
Somewhat tenuous, to say the least.
Tenuous for sure.
Why? Take us into the life at that time. Why was it that tough? The obvious reasons, but what were you guys dealing with?
Sure. Well, in Colorado at the time, as I stated earlier, we opened these businesses with a $25 check. Of course, we had to invest a little bit more than that in building these facilities, but there were no regulations at the time, and there were no licenses.
Mm-hmm.
So the state began to play catch up. Regulations were drafted, a licensing process was developed. The state of Colorado Medical Marijuana Enforcement Division came to be, and the industry began to mature. There were a lot of issues in the early days with groups trying to, wade their way through these regulations and these licensing processes, which some were at the state level, some were at the local level, and depending on state or local, one thing that was certain is they were always changing.
Mm-hmm.
So it was difficult for anybody to keep on top of at the time, and even today, regulations continue to change.
Yes, and even in Colorado. So here we are. We've got Jay, we've got Diane, we've got the amendment has passed. We have no more cultivation. We have no more dispensary. Jay's got his dirt bike. That's fantastic. Diane's making headway in the NCIA. What's the inflection point to Canna Advisors?
Look, the inflection point was the 2012 election.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the trip to Boston, and it was the group of 5 guys that reached out and said, "Can you help us?"
So you helped them, but those were, that's just one group. How did this turn into a business?
Well, we began to work with one group,
Mm-hmm.
and then we began to work with groups in other states.
Okay. And do you want to tell us more there, or?
Sure. We'll take that to a certain level.
Okay.
While we were working in Connecticut,
Yeah.
we also began to work with a group in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
Now in Connecticut, the competition was statewide. So to avoid any conflict of interest in Connecticut, we can only work with one group.
Got it.
In Massachusetts, the licenses were going to be awarded by county. So as long as we had no more than one group per county, we could avoid a conflict.
Mm-hmm.
But still being mindful of our bandwidth, we certainly did not work with a group in every county. but we did work on varying degrees of involvement. And again, this is the early days where nobody quite knew, what we needed to put together to win a license. We worked with a total of 6 groups in Massachusetts. Some we were very involved with, some not. But once the Massachusetts licensing process was completed and licenses were awarded, we were happy to find out that we were part of 3 groups out of 20 that were awarded licenses with 1 alternate.
Great. So now you've got obvious success in Colorado. You've got experience in Connecticut. You've just won a license in Massachusetts. So now we've got a little bit of the wind at our backs. What's the next step?
Yeah, now we have some momentum. So we it was 3, and then one of the alternate group got a license, so that turned into 4. We went on to work in Nevada with a number of groups where we were successful, winning a total of 8 licenses, including 2 dispensary. I also worked in Illinois, where we won both cultivation and dispensary.
Okay. And so just give us a picture from your perspective, you having won these licenses. First on the difference in the way that the regulations, some of the regulations are being written, but the way that the licenses are set up, the differences between Connecticut, Massachusetts, Nevada.
Sure, it's always different.
Right.
I mean, every aspect of it is different sometimes depending on the state. As an example, in Connecticut, you had 1 license for cultivation that also included the manufacturing of infused products, and then there was a separate license for dispensary. In Massachusetts, it was 1 license for cultivation, dispensary, and manufacture of infused products. So vertical integration.
Right.
And of course, currently in New York, it's 1 license for a vertically integrated operation. Then you have some states like Nevada, where all the licenses are yet again separate, and in Colorado, where all the licenses are separate. Patient qualifying conditions vary from state to state. I could tell you the most onerous state right now is the state of Illinois.
On medical conditions.
Well, not only on medical conditions,
Yeah.
but what it takes to become a patient.
Okay.
It's pretty disappointing when a sick person, in order to get their medicine, has to be fingerprinted, has to complete a criminal background check, just to get the medicine that could help them and save their lives.
Right. You're talking about a cancer patient who now has to be treated like a criminal.
Yep. Cancer patient wants access to cannabis, which not only could help with the chemo, but potentially cure their cancer. He has to be treated like a criminal.
Right. So that is, to the patient at ground level. As far as separate, everything is separate, everything is vertical, whatever. You said that everything is always different. What, if anything, is similar? What is there any backbone at all of any thing in any way in all of these states, in each of these states?
There is certainly one common theme across every state. The challenge.
How do you mean?
Just the challenge of getting a license and the challenge of setting up an operation. Just all the hoops that you have to jump through. I don't think there's one place yet where it's easy. I mean, some states are easier than others, but we're all still pioneers. We're all still at the ground floor. Maybe we haven't even arrived at the ground floor of this industry yet, but it's still tough.
And do you, having been involved in each of these states and having had success and understanding that the only thing that is similar is that it's difficult. What are you finding in successful clients? What and the makeup of the client base has to be different in each. So some states require that there's a physician that's part of the part of the group or what have you. I'm not talking about the specific makeup. I'm talking about the internal makeup of the clients. Who is succeeding?
Sure. It was kind of funny. In Connecticut, in Massachusetts, and our Connecticut group was a great bunch of successful business people. In Massachusetts, there were a lot of groups that won. That really did not have a well-rounded team.
Okay. That did win.
that did win.
Okay.
And I think the reason that was in some of the early states in the earlier days is, men and women that were successful and respected in their states, that had access to capital. The higher level of applicant was not yet comfortable coming into the industry, even 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
A year ago that began to change,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly now the level of applicant is certainly elevated, compared to 2 years ago.
In terms of business acumen.
Business acumen, standing in the community, relationships with the right people,
Mm-hmm.
access to capital.
So that's on the investor level, and we see all sorts of information about the rising revenues, both on the way in and on the way out to taxes and all that. So it's obviously successful. There are many ways to be successful in this industry now, and it is becoming more legitimized as far as who's getting involved, as you're saying. What are your further thoughts to that? In other words, if that changed about a year ago, and now it is completely different than it was in the early days, where do you see this going? Here we are in May of 2015. What do you think is going to be the makeup of what's happening in 12 months from now?
Sure. There's a lot of disruption that is happening in the industry, and the pace of this disruption is only going to increase.
Mm-hmm.
As an example, 3, 4, 5 years ago, the ideal person to hire to run your cultivation facility, was potentially, not always, but potentially somebody that had been, running it an illegal grow out of their basement for the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now the ideal person is the guy or the gal from Syngenta or Ball Horticulture with a PhD in horticulture that's been in controlled environment horticulture for 30 or 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
That high level person would never even consider coming into the cannabis industry a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now they are. The same goes with certain doctors and certain chemists and researchers when it comes to working with cannabis to develop medicines. That was somewhat taboo
Mm-hmm.
until very recently, and for a lot of people in a lot of areas, it's still taboo. There was a researcher that was fired from one of the universities in Arizona because she proposed to do a study on cannabis
Mm-hmm.
as medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Now she's up in Colorado and she's able to successfully work on that study. And keep in mind, Arizona is a state with a medical marijuana program, and so we still have a lot of challenges with getting people with experience and expertise into the industry, but that's changing rapidly.
It is changing rapidly, and you feel that that's where things are going. What are you working on today? So you've talked about Connecticut, you talked about Massachusetts, you talked about Nevada. Where else are you taking your dirt bike?
Sure. I wish I could take my dirt bike back to the East Coast because I do believe that the East Coast has the best dirt biking.
Okay.
But I digress. We're currently working in New York State
Mm-hmm.
with a great group on a New York application, and we're also beginning to work with groups in the state of Maryland.
Okay.
Because Maryland's going to have an application process this fall.
So my understanding of New York is it's extremely tight. Is that the tightest state that you've experienced?
The tightest for sure.
Okay, good. And I think that the governor would be happy to hear you say that, quite frankly, right? I mean, Andrew Cuomo is okay with it, but just okay with it.
He's just okay. I mean, it's listen. The program in New York is not a good program.
Mm-hmm.
There's only going to be a total of 20 dispensaries for a population of 20 million.
Mm-hmm.
It's very restrictive, but it's a stepping stone. And whether the program is good or bad, at the very least, it will clearly provide some medicine to some people, and it'll either improve those people's lives, possibly save their lives.
Right.
So even if it helps one person and saves one person's life, it's certainly a good program.
Yeah, and it's funny that you used the example of New York early on. So it's the inverse of the Boulder dispensary situation from the early days.
Yes.
What's going on in Maryland? What is that starting to look like?
Well, the Maryland program is going to be a good program. The patient qualifying conditions are very reasonable. It appears that Maryland is going to allow non-residents to come to Maryland, get a medical marijuana card, and get medicine. And there's a reasonable
Let me
number.
interrupt. Not use their out-of-state cards, because I know Nevada is allowing you to use your out-of-state card, right?
Correct.
So I just want to make sure I understand the difference.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the reciprocity with cardholders from other states, but my understanding is that a non-resident of Maryland could come to Maryland, see a Maryland doctor, get a card, and access medicine.
Great. So things are certainly opening up as far as medicine is concerned, right? I mean,
They sure are.
yeah. Where else do you have your eyes, if not your feet?
Well, we're building a new project in Colorado. We have a 5-acre piece of property where we're developing a new campus for both cultivation, infused products manufacturing, and dispensary.
So back to real estate, somewhat.
Yeah, somewhat back to real estate and being owner-operators again in Colorado.
Excellent. All right. So when is that going to be done? When should we look for that?
I would look for that being open the summer of 2016.
So it's right around the corner.
Right around the corner.
All right. So my two final questions for you are the same questions that we ask everyone. They sound the same, which is what has surprised you? The first question is what has surprised you in cannabis? And the second question is what has surprised you in life? So as far as cannabis is concerned, from the early days through now, what has surprised you most?
You know, Seth, that's a big question. You should have given me that ahead of time and given me some time to think about that.
We like to do it on the spot.
Well, I would say that the biggest surprise in cannabis, and it's certainly a welcome surprise, and it's also a surprise that continues to develop, is how truly beneficial this plant is. And it's been a surprise to learn about how this plant became illegal in the first place. It's been a surprise over time to learn for how long we as human beings have used this plant as a medicine. And it's a continuing, developing surprise to learn about how many different medical conditions cannabis could be beneficial for.
Yeah. And we've covered only the tip of the iceberg, as I've said, as far as cannabis as medicine. We will continue to do that. What about life? What has surprised you most in life?
What have some of the other people said, Seth?
Some have said the spelling of Jay's last name. That's come up.
I've heard that a lot.
Because the C is, you're not expecting the C right at the beginning there.
No, you don't.
And then you go right to the Z.
It screws everybody up. You know, one of my biggest surprises in life is, really how hard, I'd say, how hard you're really going to, get down and focus and work for what you want. I think when I was a young person, I thought it'd be a little bit easier.
Yeah, me too. Isn't that funny?
See? So we have that in common.
Indeed. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciated your story. And obviously, we're going to have to get Diane now,
Absolutely.
Because this is only half the story.
Yeah. I'll go down and talk to her right now.
All right. Perfect.
Thank you, Seth.
Thank you. Firstly, I hope you understood his dry sense of humor, to say the least. What I especially loved, aside from the sense of humor, was the comment, "Nothing is impossible for those that have the will." Speaking of that, after the interview, he said, "I'm going back to Massachusetts." So for those of you who know who Dewey Evans is, look out for Jay. He's on his way back.